I don't even know if I have to introduce her anymore. But here's Carol Roth, recovering investment banker and author of the book I've been telling you to buy for a while now, The War on Small Business. Carol, okay, the federal government, they keep saying they're going to run out of money in like 4 days. What does that mean? I thought they just had a big printer.
They're always running out of money. It's always going to be a giant crisis every year. We're going to be thrown into bankruptcy because of the debt ceiling. This political theater is so frustrating. I've been talking about it on air for pretty much a decade now. And every year it's like the same movie. Like they just keep putting it out like an action film, like a comic book movie, so to speak. And it always ends the same way. They always end up raising the debt ceiling. And the challenge that we have is that this is not a way to be fiscally responsible, because raising the debt ceiling is basically just paying for stuff we've already bought. It's not authorizing new spending. So what we really should be doing is tying the payments for any new spending together with the debt ceiling. That would probably make a lot more sense. So if you're going to propose something that we're going to buy, we should figure out how to pay for it at that time. And frankly, we should make sure it is paid for and we're not taking on new debt. But then we wouldn't get to go through all of this wonderful theater and create all of this drama that everything is going to go, south if we don't raise the debt ceiling.
Carol, now, I admit I'm not the oldest person in the world. I'm certainly not the youngest person in the world, as you can tell by all the gray in my beard. But I feel like I only heard the word debt ceiling about the time Barack Obama got elected. And now it's every other week we've got to raise the thing. What happened? Is this like 15 minutes ago this thing came around?
Well, as the oldest person in the world, I can tell you that it is somewhat of a newer concept, and that is because of the explosion of spending and debt that has happened over the past, kind of couple of decades, so to speak. I mean, if you go back to 1999, 2000, not to say that we didn't have a substantial amount of debt, but it was something that made sense within the context of the GDP and within the context of taxes, et cetera. And the epic amount of spending, we've increased the population since like 1999, 2000, around 15%, but we have increased the spending at the government level, federal government level, not all levels, but federal government level by 140%. And that means that they continue to do that, again, not through taxes that they're collecting from us, but through running up these deficits and then putting that on the tab for us to pay for later. And it's not just the tab for us to pay for later, Jesse, it's also the interest expense that we incur. Because as you know, if you put something on your credit card, it's not just what you bought that kills you, it's that interest rates. They have been, through the Federal Reserve, artificially suppressing interest rates. So it doesn't seem like it's going to cost that much. But as we're seeing inflation as the outgrowth of a lot of these policies, eventually that's going to have to go up to a normalized level. And then it was projected within 10 years, and I think this could be conservative, that 30% of all tax dollars are going to be for interest on the debt, which means paying for things that we've already bought and making that purchase more expensive. And that's where all of this becomes, true insanity.
By the way, just a quick side note before I go back to Carol here. I just want everyone here to know, never, ever, ever carry a month-to-month balance on your credit card. Never, ever, ever. I don't care if you're 15 and your parents helped you get it, or you're 95. Never pay a dime of interest on your credit card, you nutballs. All right, Carol.
Wait, no,
why the explosion?
You're just say that and not let me add it in. This is one of my dad's progressive peace tenets: is do not buy things that you cannot afford. So, debt is for an investment. It is not for an expense. Like Jesse said, don't put stuff on your credit card that you can't afford. Now you may go.
Carol,
you may continue on your own show, Jesse.
No, what we just said there is probably as beneficial as anything else we will say. All right, I'm glad I had the dad I had as well. Carol, you said there was an explosion of spending in 2000. Well, we all can do the math. That's about the time George W. Bush came into office. Can you help me unpack where that explosion in spending came from? Is that a Republican thing, Democrat thing? Is it George Bush? Is it the war on terror, if we're still calling it that? Is it Medicare Plan D? What is it?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been since 2000, it's been a steady increase. Certainly, all of the war spending has been a huge part of that. Increases in some of the quote unquote social programs that we have, obviously, is another big chunk of that. And then over the past 19 months, we've added a ton to our national debt because of the quote unquote COVID relief from the government mandated shutdowns and them quote unquote fixing the problems that they caused. So there are a number of different factors to blame. The reality is that this is a systemic issue. This isn't a party issue. So while everybody wants to blame one party or the other, both parties have had an equal hand, obviously in different areas. Republicans perhaps more on the war side, Democrats more on the social spending side. But over and over again, nobody has stood up to be fiscally responsible and or fiscally conservative on a year over year basis. And that's what's gotten us into the trouble that we have. It's expanded not only the spending, but the purview of the federal government and the focus and the kind of control that they have over our lives, and certainly moved the concept of what a republic was meant to be to really this command and control economy. And it's not a good thing for our freedom, including our economic freedom.
Carol, obviously we owe money to a bunch of people, including ourselves, which I still can't get over how insane that is. But we owe money to a bunch of people, including ourselves.
Right.
What does happen when we get to the point where we can't make that payment? I mean, no one's coming to evict us, but what is at least a potential fallout of that when the bill comes due and the money's simply not there? Because everyone knows we're getting there eventually.
Yeah, I mean, this has been the biggest debate amongst people who like to debate these sort of things. And the first answer is, I really don't know, but there are lots of hypotheses that are out there. The good news that I always put out is that we are the skinniest kid at fat count. So we are the reserve currency. We are the biggest and most important economy. And oh, by the way, it's not just our government and our central banks that have been acting irresponsibly. It's everyone's around the world, pretty much. Every major central banking authority and big country. So like there could be this weird pact on one side that like everyone's like, well, let's just all cross it off the books and pretend this never happens. And everybody's in agreement that that's the best thing. And it could be that, they try to tax the quote unquote wealthy, which always means taxing the middle class more and more to try and get more money in. But eventually economics don't work. And what happens is it threatens our currency. It threatens our currency is backed by the quote unquote faith in the government, which is really the faith in our economic system. And if it gets so far out of whack, where there is no longer any faith, then you end up in a situation like we have seen in Venezuela, which was once like the fourth or fifth wealthiest nation. And now it costs, and obviously this is hyperbole, but like $1 trillion for, some toilet paper. But again, we are that skinniest kid at fat camp, so I'm sure we will leverage that. The likely, I hate to say this, Jessica, but the likely thing that happens is, some sort of distraction, some sort of horrible situation, manufactured war or whatnot to distract from the problem and to create a rebuilding scenario. And unfortunately, that's the kind of mentality that the central planners have.
Hey, thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me, like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.